Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. The Amazon rainforest, with its unknown dangers lurking in every corner, its slowly growing trees and deep shadows, is a place that knows all too well how challenging a child's fight for survival can be. Carla Jacinto, just 5 years old, had no experience in survival. Up until that point in her life, she had no knowledge of the dangers nature could present. The vast greenery of the Amazon seemed to her like just a change of scenery. That day, Carla and her family had gone on a trip to the Amazon rainforest in Colombia. While walking in a group through nature with her family, Carla, in search of adventure, had moved ahead. As they ventured deeper into the forest, she suddenly found herself falling behind, unnoticed by the group. All she had in her mind was her imagination. She wanted to explore, to see new places by observing nature. But without realizing it, she quickened her pace and soon could no longer see anyone beside her. After a while, she heard no sound at all. The rustling, the wind blowing the leaves, the birds chirping, none of these were present anymore. Then suddenly, she was alone in the heart of the forest. When she realized she was lost, it was so quiet that all she could hear was her own breath. Looking around, she saw no one. It didn't take long for her to understand that something was terribly wrong. Fear began to creep into her, slowly wrapping itself around her. It came like a river, a cold wave of fear that prevented her from holding back her tears. But there was only one thing she could do: move forward. No matter how far she went, the forest around her grew darker and more threatening. The branches of the trees grew thicker, and creeping vines tried to block her path. The sky had become overcast, and it was unclear when the rain would fall. At that moment, time seemed to stop for Carla. Her family, the other tourists, the rescue team, none of them were coming. After a while, all the sounds around her completely disappeared. As the night began to fall, loneliness grew deeper. She was just a child. When she was with her parents, the world seemed like a safe place. But now, the vast forest before her looked at her with a threatening stare. As Carla realized the danger of the world she was in, one question occupied her mind. What should she do? Could she survive by doing this? Her mind was confused and her body was exhausted, but her survival instinct kicked in. She took another step. With every step, she ventured deeper into the forest, trying to escape the place she had gotten lost. But the strange and vast nature of the forest seemed to pull her in deeper with every passing minute. She had only one thought in her mind. She would either follow the forest's rules and survive, or nature would rule over her. To survive, she had to overcome her fear first. She had to learn new ways to avoid danger by observing her surroundings. But with every step, it felt as though the deep forest and hidden dangers were watching her. When a snake slithered by her, like a forked tongue, it made her realize how real the dangers were. After passing the snake, the sounds around her grew louder. Every noise seemed like a warning of something more dangerous. And in that moment, Carla realized that her survival in the forest depended solely on her courage and her understanding of nature's rules. Carla's first night in the forest was one of the most terrifying experiences a child's mind could endure. As the darkness of the night descended, the grim atmosphere of the forest intensified. The sounds of the leaves rustling in the wind between the trees quickened Carla's heartbeat. She felt alone and unsafe. In that moment, being with her family seemed like a distant, unreachable dream. Carla, with a clouded fear in her eyes, looked around. As she moved deeper into the forest, the fruit clusters among the rocks near the river and the sounds of the birds suddenly stopped. Everything went silent. She could only hear her own breath. She wanted to shout, "Mom! Dad!" But not a single word left her mouth. Her voice seemed to vanish, trapped by the depths of the forest. Desperation made her feel even more isolated. In that moment, The reality of a child lost in the forest, struggling with loneliness and fear, became all too clear. Her instincts were trying to tell her something, but she didn't really know what to do. There was one thing, but it wasn't right. With every passing minute, it seemed like her chances of survival were slipping away. But somehow, Carla had to find a way. In her mind, her mother's words echoed. Spending the night in a forest is very difficult. But at that moment, these warnings held no meaning. Every corner of the forest had become even more threatening with the approaching darkness. Slowly, the stars in the sky disappeared, and the clouds thickened, signaling the arrival of rain. Carla needed to find shelter to survive the night. She felt so small and powerless that she was far from knowing what to do in the face of nature's vast and fierce power. She took a few more steps, and the softness of the ground beneath her feet seemed to emphasize the crushing weight on a child's soul. Finally, she took refuge under a group of trees, but the ground was uneven. As she sat down, her back pressed against the cold, damp earth. The first raindrop fell from the sky and struck her head. As the rain poured down, the little girl struggled to cope with the cold that made her body shiver. For a moment she paused, listening to the silence around her, and realized that her greatest fear came from it. She could only hear the howling of the wind and the rustling of the trees, but the dangers of the deep forest were so real for a child that it almost seemed possible to see them. Snakes lay hidden impatiently in the dark, and nature's predators were watching her at every moment. In the early hours of the night, Carla's every move forced her to be more cautious. She felt something approaching but couldn't see it. Slowly, she began to notice the sound of snakes. Their hissing made Carla's fear grow even more. She took quieter steps, but in this world, each step felt slower and more faint, like the fading hope of a lost child. At that moment, she felt such profound loneliness that the sound of her heartbeat rang in her ears. But she had to learn to fight her fear. After a while, the rain stopped, but the darkness stretched on. Carla tried to find shelter from the other dangers of the forest, protecting herself. There was nothing else she could do. Thoughts were spinning in her head. I need to get through this. I must survive, she thought. Her body was tired, and her eyes were blurred, but she had learned the first lesson of survival. She could either surrender to her fears or face the obstacles of nature. Throughout the night, Carla fought against the silence with every movement, but those dark moments fueled the fear of eternal disappearance inside her. Solving the forest's secrets was one of the hardest things a child could do. Yet somehow Carla managed to survive that night. Carla had made it through her first night in the forest, surviving the cold and fear. But when morning came, she realized that things would only get harder. When she opened her eyes, she was still, lying in the middle of the forest, alone and abandoned. In the first moments, her subconscious made her feel safe for an instant, but the thick greenery and darkness around her brought back the fears that had awakened. Everything felt like a dream, but in reality it was far from it. A world she had never encountered before seemed to follow Carla's every step. Every sound from the forest made her heartbeat race. She knew she had to do something to feel safe again. This thought deepened with every passing second. She had to do something to survive. Otherwise, nature would rule over her, and her life would be swept away like a leaf falling into the river. Something began to emerge in her mind. Her mother had sometimes told her about how to find food to survive in the forest. However, she hadn't fully understood those lessons. Now, trying to remember everything she had learned, Carla decided to act. The forest had lush green trees and plants full of life. Trusting her instincts, Carla began to collect some fruits. Each fruit reminded her of the hope to survive. She was not strong, but it was the first step in a survival struggle. When she ate the fruits she collected, she achieved a small victory against the forest's harsh face. She was still a child, but for the first time, she had succeeded in overcoming something. Drinking rainwater was enough to fight hunger. Her small fingers caught the water droplets falling to the ground, drinking the fresh water with the hope that it could save her life. The rainwater wasn't as clear as the river water, but she had to accept whatever nature offered. However, Carla's biggest enemy wasn't just nature. The forest presented even greater dangers that a person had to contend with in order to survive. Snakes, wild cats hiding in the darkness, and many other predators that were never seen but could emerge at any moment seemed to be watching her. Every moment, every corner posed a threat. In a child's mind, the terror of the forest was like a massive burden. But Carla knew she had to take a deep breath, push aside her fears, and take the next step. When she took shelter under a tree, the howling wind grew louder. But this time, she didn't freeze with fear. With every step, she found a little more courage and began to overcome her fears. The bravery inside her grew as she moved deeper into the forest. She started to quicken her pace, heading deeper into the woods. Despite sensing the dangers and fears around her, she moved with the desire to survive. She didn't just want to survive. She wanted to stand tall against the challenges of that terrifying forest. As Carla moved deeper into the forest, she carefully watched every corner while navigating through a world she didn't know in order to survive. Slowly, she began learning how to fight for her life. She felt like a hunter, but this hunter's prey wasn't her. It was nature itself. Every fruit, every drop of water, every little discovery felt like a victory. After some time, she ventured further and began to adjust to the unfamiliar face of the forest. With each step, she tried to understand the threats nature posed. But she realized something else. Survival wasn't just a physical struggle, it was also a mental battle. Fear, indecision, loneliness, but most importantly, determination. This was the greatest force keeping her alive. One morning, the sunlight symbolized not only nature, but also the courage and willpower inside her. She was getting stronger with each passing day. In her fight for survival, the dark forest was becoming not just terrifying but also educational, and she continued to survive in the forest's depths, slowly but steadily, turning every moment into a lesson. For 2 weeks, Carla's life had turned into the harsh rhythm of survival. The forest to her was as threatening as an enemy and as instructive as a teacher. Waking up between the dark sky and the silent, deep woods had become a habit. In her mind, a thought grew clearer each day. She would either live in harmony with nature or nature would defeat her. Every step, every moment became an escape. Carla was constantly on the move. Stopping for even a second could mean becoming prey. In the forest's depths, the presence of snakes, wildcats, and other predators was like a constant threat, watching her every move. Snakes, in particular, felt like the closest danger. These slow-moving creatures were everywhere in the forest. Like an unseen threat, they were always slithering around her, approaching from different directions. But Carla had learned to listen to every warning nature gave her, moving with her instincts. She could distinguish the hissing of snakes and the subtle movements in the shadows. This became her first weapon for survival. One morning, Carla's attention slipped. As she walked slowly, she heard a rustling sound from behind the thick bushes. Suddenly, everything went silent. Fear spread through her like a wave. A snake. She quickly scanned her surroundings, but all she saw was pitch-black darkness. Every muscle tensed, and the fear began to paralyze her. But she had to stay calm. Slowly, she moved to the side and watched the snake's movement. The hissing sound told her the snake had to move back a little. Holding her breath, Carla moved more cautiously and managed to see part of the snake. Fortunately, something else caught the snake's attention, and with that opportunity, Carla quickly moved away. This experience made her more alert and awake. Each day became a fight for survival, sometimes turning into life-or-death moments. Simple survival tasks like gathering fruits or drinking water were important, but the forest also had hidden enemies. Forest cats, predators. These creatures created dangers with every step. One morning, Carla heard a scream. Then a few rustling leaves made her realize one of the forest's hidden inhabitants was approaching. Carla quickly took shelter under a tree and tried to hide. The eyes of such predators were sharp and attentive in nature. Forest cats, while watching their prey, would notice even the slightest movement. Carla held her body still like a rock, slowly breathing in and out. She was forming a strategy in her mind of what to do next. To survive, she knew she needed to be quick, but also smart. As the predator came closer, Carla carefully stepped on the tip of a branch. Suddenly the leaves rustled, and the forest cat abruptly turned its head. In that moment, Carla silently moved backward and hid behind another tree. Fortunately, the predator couldn't focus on her and moved away. As the nights went on, Carla found it even harder to sleep. The cold weather, the constant rain, the sounds in the darkness of the forest, and especially the snakes hunting at night, kept her always awake. The sound of the snakes sent chills down her spine, but she had to sleep in order to survive in this world. Every sleep was an opportunity to survive, but it was also a great risk. Every rustle, every wave created by the wind reminded her of the danger. Still, waking up in the mornings felt like a miracle. Carla continued to face the dangers of each new day, trying to seize every chance to stay alive. Over time, nature's wild experiences had taught her the subtleties of survival. Every warning, every sound became a lesson. She had learned the rules of the forest. Snakes, silent predators moving in the dark. Each was an experience for her. She had learned to move fearlessly, always looking for new shelter. In the forest's grip, Carla continued to move forward fearlessly. Snakes, wild cats, and all the other threats made her stronger with each passing day. She had learned to defend herself, to adapt to the world around her. But with every step there was one truth. No matter how strong the forest was, Carla would do whatever it took to survive. Carla's fight for survival had started to become a miracle with each passing day. Her body was growing weaker, but her mind was growing even stronger. It wasn't just nature. Time had become her greatest enemy. As the days grew longer, the nights became colder and darker. The harshness of the weather turned every morning into a new battle. She had no clothes to protect herself from the cold, and as her body grew accustomed to heat and exhaustion, she felt the pain more deeply. Yet there was something inside her, a drive, a survival instinct that gave her strength. One morning, as she opened her eyes in pain, she heard a sound from a distance. At first, she tried to determine whether the sound was real or not. The forest was always silent. Sometimes it was just the howling of the wind, sometimes the rustling of trees. But this time, there was something else. A faint noise like footsteps rustling through the leaves. Carla perked up her ears and listened more carefully. Yes, this sound was from a human. A glimmer of hope had appeared. Carla had been alone for so long that nature had made her forget how precious the sound of a human voice could be. But now, that sound had awakened her. It was like a door had opened. Hope, which had been trapped inside her for so long, began to sprout again. However, this wasn't the end of her struggle for survival. Carla was still far from safety. It wouldn't be easy for the search teams to reach the depths of the forest. Carla carefully examined her surroundings to understand the direction from which the sound was coming. Her eyes scanned the rocks by the riverbank, and then she noticed movement among the bushes. A group of people was moving through the deep forest. However, the distance between them meant that her rescue wouldn't happen immediately. She knew that. Slowly and carefully, she began looking for a place to signal them. In her mind, she knew the only way not to miss this opportunity was to accept that everything couldn't happen at once, but still move patiently. She walked slowly, but the challenges of the forest continued to test her at every step. Her feet ached, her body was numb, but step by step she was getting closer to hope. At that moment, the forest, which had once seemed like an enemy, now seemed like a friend. The rocks by the river, the path she had taken so many times, everything was a reminder of the time she had spent there. Re-exploring those old, unfamiliar places felt like seeing old friends again. At one point, she decided to rest. Although her body was exhausted, her mind was still clear and alert. The silence of the forest made her think about how easy everything could be. For a few minutes, she realized that all the efforts she had made to survive were, in fact, in pursuit of something right. Indeed, in the end, these efforts would pay off. The search teams were only a few hours away, but this was still a great struggle. Carla had spent a long time in the depths of the forest. Most of the time, finding water or gathering food was an important fight to sustain her life. But this time, hope gave her a different strength. Without losing focus for even a moment, she began to move forward with even greater determination. In her mind, there was only one thought. If I find the right path, they will find me. With this thought in her mind, she moved forward quickly. Yes, it could be a miracle, but she had spent years learning how to face the challenges of nature. Hope became a light that strengthened Carla with each step she took. Yes, maybe the time, for her rescue had come. Although one more night had passed, the search teams finally succeeded in reaching Carla. When Carla finally started walking toward them and extended her hands, she was so exhausted that her body was trembling. But there was something in her eyes, a strength, a determination, and hope. Hope wasn't just about continuing to survive, but also about bringing her salvation. Exactly 2 weeks later, it was announced that Carla had survived. At that moment, it seemed like a true miracle. The rescue teams that found her had believed survival was impossible. Each passing day made it less likely that a child who had gotten lost in the depths of the forest could be saved. But Carla had managed to win her battle against nature. The search teams had searched every nook and cranny, every tree trunk, and every rock tirelessly, day and night. In the vast wilderness of the Amazon rainforest, when a child goes missing, finding them becomes nearly impossible. But Carla had found a light, a resistance within herself. That light grew stronger with each passing day, ultimately guiding the search teams to her. One morning, as Carla moved through the depths of the forest with her last bit of strength, she heard a sound. Her vision was blurry, and her body was almost spent. But when she heard that sound, everything stopped for a moment. Human voices. Yes, it was true. Those voices belonged to the search team coming to find her. The child, nearly falling over, began walking toward them. She waved her hands weakly and shouted with all her strength. Her eyes were weary from exhaustion, sleeplessness, and hunger, but there was something in them. Determination. Carla had surrendered herself to her survival instincts. As the rescue team moved deeper into the forest, they noticed a figure approaching. She was a little girl who had paid the price for every moment she lived, but resisted every hardship. Carla, emerging from the forest, collapsed before the rescue team. With her last strength in her hands, she had managed to take a few steps toward them. The team immediately ran to her, enveloping her in safety. At that moment, there was a silence among the team members. Carla was so weak and exhausted that for several minutes she only breathed deeply. However, the relief of making it out of the forest temporarily intoxicated her. A child had survived for 2 weeks in the Amazon rainforest alone. But more importantly, as Carla's body slowly began to heal, her spirit was growing stronger. The leader of the rescue team, looked at her and paused for a moment. "This girl is a true example of survival," he said. The others nodded in agreement. Carla's courage, determination, and resistance to nature deeply moved them. The team quickly transported Carla to a safe zone. Every moment, every minute she had fought to survive was now over, but she had never lost her survival instincts. When Carla was brought to the hospital, the medical team first tried to stabilize her. Her body was extremely weak from dehydration and exhaustion, but she hadn't lost her survival strength. The doctors, in every word they spoke to encourage her, expressed their admiration for Carla's determination and courage. "This is a miracle," they said. But the greatest miracle is that the strength inside her never ran out. Carla's survival effort was not just a victory against nature's challenges, but also a great triumph over the strength within herself. A little child had withstood every danger the forest could throw at her, but her greatest battle was against her own fears and exhaustion. As she ran from snakes, wild animals, rain, and hunger, something inside her kept pushing her forward. It was not just an inner survival instinct, it was a light of hope. And that hope turned into Carla's courage, which kept her alive. This story became a true example of how powerful the desire to survive can be, even under the toughest conditions. Carla's story was not just the tale of a girl who got lost in the Amazon rainforest and survived. It was also a symbol of the human struggle against nature, the fight against fear, and how, when everything seems lost, one can still follow a light of hope.